Good morning to all of you. It's very good to see you here. Appreciate your presence very, very much. To those of you who may be watching from some other place with our live feed, we're glad to have you with us today as well. There are some here with us today that are visiting, and let me extend a very special thank you and welcome to you. We're glad you're here and hope you enjoy being with us today. Let me also wish you a very happy new year. We're about to turn the page on another year tomorrow, and it's good that we can spend today together and this evening together preparing and thinking about the new year and the things that we might be able to do in that year. So we're going to talk this morning about some things that have to do with that, and I hope that this lesson this morning is beneficial in respect to thinking about planning our lives for the future and the things that we should and should not do. We've titled our lesson today, Hezekiah's Unwelcome News, and you probably can gather where that came from the reading that we had this morning. You've already heard about the news that Hezekiah got that he didn't want to hear, news that was very difficult for him to hear. And we're going to talk about that a little bit today as we progress through this lesson. I want to start first by just talking a little bit about who Hezekiah was. We'll get back to our scriptures in just a moment, but I want to just lay a little bit of groundwork and give a little context for who Hezekiah was. Who was this man, Hezekiah? It's a name we don't hear very often today. Not too many people use it. I was talking to Cynthia and Philip this morning, though, and they have a family member, a child named Hezekiah. So that name has started to be used again, but historically, in my life at least, I didn't know anyone named Hezekiah. So it's a name that we're not all that familiar with, except through the Scriptures. So let's find out who this man, this Hezekiah from the Scriptures actually was. King Hezekiah was the son of King Ahaz. And you probably will remember King Ahaz as being, if not the worst, one of the worst kings that we read about in the Scriptures. A very corrupt individual in the sight of God. And that was Hezekiah's father. And you would think that perhaps having a father like that would have a very negative impact on Hezekiah, but we'll see in just a moment that Hezekiah was not like that at all. In fact, he was part of a pattern that we see in Judah of good king, bad king, good king, bad king. And we'll see more about that this morning as we think about Hezekiah. He was the 13th king of Judah, and he ruled about 25 years. And I've shown the dates when I think his rule was. You might disagree with that. There are people who do, people who move that to 10 or 11 years one way or the other, and I wouldn't argue with you about that. Everybody who looks at that has a different opinion, and everybody's absolutely sure they're right. But you can see at least a little bit of the context of when he lived and when he ruled. He was among the greatest kings that Judah had. In fact, probably the greatest king since King David. And he came at a time when Judah really needed a great king because of the bad things that his father had done. He's known most widely because of reversing what his father had caused. That's essentially what he did that everybody knows about. He reversed the idolatry that his father had brought into the country. And a lot of the things that his father promoted is exactly what he set about reversing from day one. Apparently, from reading the Scriptures, the very first day that he was king, he set about to change a lot of the things his father did. And there's a lot of that, but we'll just mention a few things that he brought about that Judah really needed to have happen. One of the things he did was repaired the temple and purged it of the idols that had been brought into it. The temple had fallen into a non-use during the time of his father. In fact, the doors had been shut and barred, and people were not allowed to go in. And apparently, it had been used as a place to dump trash and refuse. So he set about to repair the temple and to make it so that it was suitable for its intended purpose. The scriptures tell us that it took the priests 8 days to clean out the trash and so forth that had accumulated in the temple. And so he caused the temple doors to be reopened so people could come in again and clean the temple up to restore it to the use that it was intended. It wouldn't have done much good to clean the temple up without cleaning up the priesthood. So he set about to do that too. And he reformed the priesthood and consecrated the priest to the role that the priest was supposed to have. That role, like the temple, had fallen out of use, and he put it back to where it was supposed to be. You can see when you hear just these things why Hezekiah was such a great king and how much Judah needed him. He restored the worship after these things were done. He restored the worship of the true God and reinstituted the observance of the Passover. They had ceased to observe the Passover during his father's time. And Hezekiah reinstituted the Passover. And what a wonderful thing that was for that country. They really needed that. God had set that forth as something that they should observe, and they had quit observing it. And because of that, they had quit getting the blessings that came with observing it, the remembrance that Mike talked about this morning that we engage in. Passover was that to them. What if we stop remembering? What if we quit communing? You can see how important that was. And he reinstituted the Passover and made the temple suitable for its use. He also set about to try to reunite Israel and Judah. You probably remember that the 10 tribes of the north and the 2 tribes of the south really had gone their separate ways. And so he set about to try to bring them back together, if not politically, at least spiritually in their worship to God, and in particular in the observance of the Passover. He invited the first Passover that was had after he took power. He invited the northern tribes to come and observe that with Judah. And that was a really groundbreaking thing that he attempted. I don't know that anyone else had really done that, and it met with some measure of success. Some of the tribes did come and observe that Passover with Judah. Probably surprised a lot of people that happened. So it tells you something about where his heart was and the things that he tried to do. That wasn't completely successful, but it was somewhat successful. He fortified Jerusalem, and of course the nation was under siege a lot of the times that we're talking about here. And in this particular period of time, Assyria was their great danger. And so they were preparing for an assault by Assyria. So he fortified the city. He built more watchtowers and strengthened the walls and things like that, prepared armaments to defend themselves. So Hezekiah was, in a way, a wartime leader because of the nature of what was going on around him. And one of the really interesting things that you can read about if you'd like to, and we won't go into it in great detail, but he built a tunnel to bring fresh water from outside the walls of Jerusalem into the city, underground. And this has been in the news within the last week or two. They have been excavating the old pool of Siloam, which was inside the walls. And this tunnel goes outside the walls, underground. It's about 1,700 feet long, and it was dug through solid rock. So they dug this tunnel to bring water from springs outside the city into the pool of Siloam, so that if they were attacked and they were under siege, and that's what happened a lot in those times, they would need fresh water, and he was looking ahead to providing that water. And he was also looking to cut water off from the enemy so that if they came there, they wouldn't have water. So he was a great visionary on these things. And when you look at the tunnel and the tunnel is still there, by the way. You could, if you were there, you could see the tunnel. Actually, I think they allow you to walk in parts of it. The tunnel was started on both ends. They started digging from both ends and met in the middle, which was quite a feat for that time. 1,700 feet of solid rock, and to be able to actually meet up and join in the middle the way they did was quite a feat. And that tunnel brought that water in from those springs to the pool of Siloam. You might remember that pool from the time of Jesus. Those people would come there when they'd come for Passover. This is where they would go for ritual cleansing before they'd go into the temple. And it's the place where Jesus healed the blind man. You might remember that from the pool of Siloam. Hezekiah is the king who put that water in that pool to begin with. He had that tunnel dug to put water in. So it's an interesting story, and it's beyond our scope today, but go read that if you can. They're excavating the pool of Siloam now. That's going on as we speak today. It's a very interesting archaeology that's there, and you might want to read about that. Hezekiah had a big hand in that. Now let's go back to our reading this morning, and we'll find out what happened to Hezekiah, what was going on in his life. And so the scriptures there say, in those days, and I believe that what it means in those days, it was in the time when they were being besieged by Assyria. Now, people disagree about whether it was before or after the Syrians besieged the city, and 185,000 of them died, and the rest of them went home, and you probably remember that story. People disagree about in what sequence. I personally think that these events happened before the death of that 185,000 people, and you'll see why in just a minute when we go just a little bit further into the scriptures. But this is, when it says in those days, these are the days it's talking about. In those days, Hezekiah was sick and near death. Hezekiah had become very, very ill and was near to dying. And Isaiah the prophet, the son of Amos, went to him and said to him, "Thus says the Lord, set your house in order, for you shall die and not live." Then he turned his face to the wall and prayed to the Lord, saying, "Remember now, O Lord, I pray, how I have walked before you in truth and with a loyal heart, and have done what was good in your sight." And Hezekiah wept bitterly. Unwelcome news for certain. Thus the name of our subject this morning. Isaiah brought news to Hezekiah that Hezekiah definitely didn't want to hear. Let's see if we can take a look there and identify specifically how he reacted to that, because it'll matter as we go through this morning what his reaction was. So what was the cause of his impending death? Let's talk about that. Perhaps we should get into that before we go any further. What was wrong with him? Everybody wants to speculate about that. So some people say, well, he had the bubonic plague. Yes, that was around during his time. Some people say, well, he had leprosy. Yes, that was around during his time. Some people say, well, he just got an infection in his blood. That was around then and is still around today. Some people say he had cancer. The truth is, we don't know what he had. We are not told exactly what was wrong with him. But he had some kind of disease like these diseases that would take your life. If you got that disease, you were going to die. That's what had happened. One of the interesting things about this is, how old was Hezekiah when this happened? How old was he when Isaiah came and said, "You're going to die and not live"? Now, I'll have to admit to you, when I was younger and even when I was old enough, I should have thought about it a little differently. The name Hezekiah and thinking about him dying and all, I envisioned an old person, and he was the king. So I wondered, how old was he? Why was he dying? And I always thought, well, he was old, and people die when they get old. So that's kind of the way I thought of it. Well, how old do you think he was? Some of you maybe know the answer to that, but let me ask you young people, think about that a minute. What do you have in your mind about his age? When you think about Hezekiah and this news that he got, how old do you think he was? You think he was a person maybe my age or maybe even older than that? Is that the vision you have of him? This is what people think of right here when they think about Hezekiah. When you think about King Hezekiah, an image like this comes to your mind. A very old man that has lived his life pretty much already. That's the image that most people have. So tell me, how old do you think he was? 39 years old. 39. Not an old man at all. He was the age of a lot of you. As I look out on the audience this morning, I see a lot of people that are in their mid to late 30s or early 40s. He was your age. How would you feel if you got news like that right now? How would you feel about that? You might have a little bit of a window into how Hezekiah felt if you think about how you would feel if you got news like that at 39 years old. He'd been on the throne about 14 years. At the time that Isaiah came to him, he became king when he was about 25. So he'd been on the throne about 14 years, 39 years old. He was literally in the prime of his life, like many of you are. You've got, you hope, a lot of years ahead of you, and probably you do. And I certainly hope that for all of you younger folks that are here. I hope that's exactly how it goes. He had accomplished a lot. Hezekiah did a lot of things that were good. We've touched on some of them, and that's not nearly all he did. Hezekiah was a very influential person in Judah, and certainly even in our lives. Things that we know and the way we understand God's relationship to people. Hezekiah had a hand in that. So Hezekiah is a very influential person. He accomplished a lot. But there was a lot more to be done. He hadn't accomplished everything that he needed to, probably not everything he wanted to. He had tried. I mentioned the reuniting of Judah and Israel, and he had tried and was working on that, but that hadn't really been fully realized. He would have liked to have done more, and when he thought about the fact that his life was over, he realized, I don't have time to finish up what I'm doing. And to make all of that worse, I believe this all happened when Jerusalem was under imminent threat of an attack by Assyria. And as I mentioned earlier, there was a point in time in which Assyria surrounded the city and were ready to lay siege to it. God caused 185,000 of them to die. This was about to happen, and he knew it. He knew there was a problem here. And now he's received a word, you're not going to be around to deal with it. I think it was a sign of God's respect that he was even told that you're not going to make it very long. I think God looked on him with favor because of the good things that Hezekiah had done. But still, 39 years old and all of these things going on. And then Isaiah walks in the room and says, listen, buddy, this is it. It's about over. He wasn't ready for that kind of news. It was probably hard to take in. Unexpected, certainly. Unwelcome, yes. What would setting his house in order have looked like to Hezekiah? What do you suppose he would have set about doing? Because obviously God had something in mind that he needed to do. What was that? What did he need to do? Well, he needed to arrange for a successor as the king. I don't know if you remember this, but Hezekiah wasn't married. He had no kids. So he didn't have a successor. If he had died at that point, there wasn't a son there ready to take the throne. So the country was going to be in a state of turmoil. And it was up to Hezekiah as the best he could, if he had time left, to try to fix that, make a transition to someone rather than just leaving them with no leader. He had to try to find someone to handle the affairs of the nation until another person could be recognized as king. If you're under immediate danger of attack, you can't have a lapse in leadership. That's why we in our country have an order of succession to high offices. The presidency has an order of succession, and it's for the very reason we're talking about. If something happens to the president, the idea that we have is that somebody else will immediately step in. There'll be no lapse in the leadership at all. And certainly he would have needed to take care of something like that, especially since he had no son. the king would have had a very sizable personal household. There were servants of all kinds, people that waited on them and took care of their needs, people that were lower level officials in the government, and he would have had to make some arrangements for these people. So there was something else that he had to do. We could go on, but you can just imagine, having thought about this, what was probably going through Hezekiah's mind. How can I get this done? How am I going to do this? There was a lot for him to do, and he apparently didn't have much time to get it done. That news had a really profound effect on him. So now let's talk about that. Here's the scriptures we started with this morning, and I want to point out exactly what his reaction was. The first thing we see there is it said he turned his face to the wall. Turned to the wall. He was apparently lying on his bed when this was told to him, and he immediately turned to the wall. Now there's, again, disagreement by people about why did he do that. And I wouldn't put up a strong argument about it, but I suspect that he wanted some privacy from others so that maybe they didn't see his emotion. Maybe he wanted to turn so that he could clarify his own thinking about this and not be interrupted in it. But certainly you can see that his first reaction was, I've got to think about this. What am I going to do? And he turns to the wall to do that. Then he prayed. And isn't this what you would have expected from Hezekiah? He was a good man and served God and tried to do the best that he could up to this point in his life. And you can see why that was his first reaction. He turned to the wall and then he prayed. And then lastly, it says he wept bitterly. He wept bitterly. Can you understand all of these reactions? I can. I can certainly see why he reacted like he did. He turned to the wall, he prayed to God, and then he wept bitterly because he knew what was about to happen and how difficult it was going to be. That situation that he was in didn't last very long. He didn't have to wonder about what was going to happen, but it looks like for just maybe a few minutes, because we read on the next few scriptures after the ones we already read, and here's what we find. And it happened before Isaiah had gone out of the middle court. So he didn't even leave the building, basically. Didn't even get outside. That the word of the Lord came to him saying, return and tell Hezekiah, the leader of my people, thus says the Lord, the God of David, your father, I have heard your prayer, I have seen your tears. Surely I will heal you. On the third day you shall go up to the house of the Lord, and I will add to your days 15 years. I will deliver you and the city from the hand of the king of Assyria, and I will defend the city for my own sake and for the sake of my servant David. There's an awful lot that could be said about those few scriptures, and we don't have time to go into a lot of that. But I do want to point something out there, and the reason I said that I thought this was before Assyria had laid siege to the city is because God is telling him, I'm going to protect the city. They're not going to be able to take the city over. And why would God say that if they had already tried to do that? So let's see now, what did God promise him? Well, there were three things. First, God said, I will heal you. Whatever the disease was, whatever was wrong with him, God said, I'll take care of that. And when he said he was going to heal him, it was beyond anything that medical science would have known how to do at that time. So this was something that God was going to do. Then he said, not only will I heal you, but I'm going to extend your life by 15 years. I'm going to give you 15 more years to serve. So he was 39. God said, you're going to live to be 54 years old. And then he says, I'll deliver the city, basically. The Assyrians are not going to come here. A lot of people describe the siege of this city by Assyria as the greatest war that never happened. And that's exactly how it went. And that was because of the promise that God made to Hezekiah. Now, what happened during those next 15 years? That's an interesting thing to contemplate. And there's a lot that we don't know. There's not as much told to us as we'd like to know, perhaps, about those 15 years. There's a few things that we do know. Judah entered into a time of blessing and peace. Things settled into sort of a normal routine for the nation under his rule. Hezekiah got married, and some writers say that he married Isaiah's daughter. Whether that's true or not, I wouldn't argue with you about that, but that's been speculated. And they had a son. His son's name was Manasseh. And so now he has a son to succeed him, but ironically, that didn't work out so well, because Manasseh was Judah's maybe most wicked king of all. He has a very good father, but he did not follow in his father's footsteps. Manasseh started to reign when he was 12 years old, and he undid everything that his father had done, pretty much. Apparently, an issue that had been present with Hezekiah but hadn't really been quite so apparent reared its ugly head. Apparently, pride was something that came into play and went unchecked after he was told he had 15 more years. Listen to what this account from 2 Chronicles says, and this is sort of a parallel account to what we're reading this morning. In those days, Hezekiah was sick and near death, and he prayed to the Lord, and he spoke to him and gave him a sign. You remember the sign was that the shadow on the sundial was going to go back by 10 degrees. That was the sign that's being referred to here. That's the sign that God gave him that he was really going to live and not die. But then in verse 25, the Bible says, "But Hezekiah did not repay according to the favor shown to him, for his heart was lifted up. Therefore wrath was looming over him and over Judah and Jerusalem." Hezekiah didn't respond in the way that he had been favored. Hezekiah was spared death, but his response to that wasn't what God expected. And apparently pride was the issue there. What's that story all about? Where did this pride issue come in? Well, apparently it had to do with a visit that he got from representative of the kings of Babylon. And it appears from studying this whole issue and putting the timeline together that this visit happened very soon after he recovered from the illness that he had. Apparently the king of Babylon and his advisors had heard that Hezekiah had had a miraculous recovery. They knew he had been sick, and they had also probably seen what happened with the shadow on the sundial when it went back by 10 degrees instead of progressing forward as normal. So they had seen all these things, and so they sent representatives to visit with Hezekiah. And when they came, apparently Hezekiah didn't think to tell them what God had done for him. Apparently his pride overwhelmed him. And so what he did do was he showed them everything that had been accumulated in the nation. And really Judah had become quite wealthy. Because of the restoration of the worship of God, the people were tithing, and they had quit doing that under his father's rule. The country had become very wealthy. And in those times and under that system, the country was Hezekiah. So Hezekiah was a very wealthy man. And he showed all that off to the Babylonian representatives that were there. And he showed them the defensive weapons that they had and other things. He was bragging. Let's just be honest about what was going on. His pride got the better of him, and he was bragging about what he had and how prosperous they were. You can read about that in 2 Kings a little bit later. Hezekiah was prosperous because of the Lord. He didn't prosper because he was such a great man. And the book of 2 Chronicles puts it this way: Hezekiah prospered in all his works. So the things that he tried to do went well. It's because God blessed him. However, regarding the ambassadors of the princess of Babylon, whom they had sent to him to inquire about the wonder that was done to the land, God withdrew from him. So when the representatives from the king of Babylon came, God let him be on his own. And apparently the reason was, said, in order to test him, and so he'd know that all that was in his heart. God wanted to find out what Hezekiah was really like. And so he let him do what he wanted to do. He withdrew his hand from that and let Hezekiah have his way. Hezekiah's life had been blessed. He'd been given so much. He had prospered beyond imagination. But apparently when the people from Babylon came along, all he could think about was how great he was. Look at me and look at what I have. Isaiah found out about this visit, and we're not told exactly how he knew it, but he found out about it, and he asked Hezekiah, what'd you say to them, and what did you show them? And it sounds like Hezekiah was a little bit reluctant in his answer. The tone of the answer seems that way. He first said, well, they came from a country far away. And then he said, well, they came from Babylon, okay. It was sort of like that. That's the impression I get from reading it. And that was not pleasing to God, and Isaiah knew that. And so he gave him some more unwelcome news. This is what he said to him. Then Isaiah said to Hezekiah, hear the word of the Lord. Behold, the days are coming when all that is in your house and what your fathers have accumulated until this day shall be carried to Babylon. Nothing shall be left, says the Lord. And they shall take away some of your sons who will descend from you, whom you will beget, and they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. That'd rock your world, wouldn't it? And this came about because of what Hezekiah had did in his visit with the representatives from Babylon. Do you know all of that came true? Every bit of it. It took about 100 years before it happened. But everything that Isaiah told him came about. Babylon came back and they sacked the city. They took all of the wealth, all of the gold. They burned the temple. They took everything out of there that was valuable because they had found out earlier how much wealth Judah had. And so then they came back and took it, just exactly the way Isaiah told him they would. You know, this kind of serves to remind us when we're going about our life all the time that it's not really all about what happens in my lifetime or your lifetime, but what have we set in motion that's going to be a problem for people that come after us? What will my grandkids and my great-grandkids that I may never see, what's going to happen to them because of what I did? And this points out very, very vividly to us that even though it took 100 years, it came back around to cause a problem for future generations. But you know, it's kind of chilling that Hezekiah just didn't really seem to care about that much. He didn't seem to be that worried about the future generations, and maybe it says something about his character. But listen to what he said. So Hezekiah said to Isaiah, now this is Hezekiah responding to what Isaiah just told him was going to happen in the future. The word of the Lord which you have spoken is good. Now, that's an odd response. You've just been told that everything that's here is going to be taken away. All the people are going to be taken away. Even your descendants are going to be taken away to serve the king in Babylon. And all you can say is, the word of the Lord is good. And then listen to this. Will there not be peace and truth, at least in my days? Sort of a chilling attitude to have, isn't it? Why would you think like that? Maybe we're getting a window into a little bit about Hezekiah that we hadn't always seen. He didn't seem to really be worried about the future that much. That's the tone I get from it. So he set in motion something that other people were going to pay for. So let's kind of summarize now what happened in those 15 years. That was our question. What went on in those 15 years? Well, he set Judah up as a prime target for Babylonian invasion, which ultimately came. He ushered in the most evil king that Judah had ever had, probably, his own son, Manasseh. He cleared the way for Judah to return to idolatry and immorality, and that's exactly what happened after Manasseh took over. And he set everything up where this would occur. And at the end of it all, he caused Judah to forfeit the land that God had given them. This is his legacy from the 15 years that God gave him. He gave him another 15, and look what happened. Look what happened. Now, we don't know exactly what efforts Hezekiah might have made to set his house in order. There's undoubtedly things that he tried to do and some things that he did do that we don't know about. But we do know this. Whatever he did was not enough. It was not enough. It fell way short of what was needed. Now let me switch gears with you just a little bit here. We've talked about Manasseh and talked about Hezekiah, and these are people that lived an awful long time ago. And I want to bring this up to current a little bit more. So let me ask you this. Have you ever been confronted yourself, or perhaps somebody very close to you that you love, with the possibility of imminent death? Have you ever had that experience? Or you've been around somebody that's had it? I know some of you have been through that. Some of you have had that experience. A lot of you haven't. A lot of you are still young enough and haven't been around anyone that's had that. Or you haven't had it yourself, and that's a blessing. If you've not had that, then you've been blessed by God not to deal with something like that. But have you ever thought about what that would feel like? You ever puzzled in your mind how that would feel? I mean, I thought about that when I was young. When I had little kids, I thought, what if something would happen to me? What if I had a disease that I couldn't survive? What would happen? So let me tell you a little bit about a personal experience. And I'm telling this not to point myself out or bring attention to myself, but I want to tell you this because I think it'll help us to kind of see how we respond to things like this. So I want to tell you what happened to me. And some of you know this story, maybe some of you don't, but I'll share it with you. I don't mind telling you. Toward the latter part of 2018, I started feeling bad. I didn't feel well at all, and I didn't know what was wrong. And as time went on a little bit, I was lethargic. I didn't have any energy. Started losing weight for no apparent reason. The long bones in my legs were aching, and I had a real pain in my abdomen on my left side. I knew something was wrong, so I went to the doctor to find what's happening to me. And he said, well, first of all, let's do some blood work. So he had blood drawn, and so in a little while after the blood was drawn, the doctor's office called me. And there's a date that I know what was going on, but I don't think you can say where you were on February 27th of 2019. I doubt that anyone here knows what you were doing on that day unless you go look at something. But I know what I was doing. I know exactly. On that day, I had an appointment that the doctor called and told me to come in. Now, when the doctor calls you and says come in, you know they're not calling you to tell you what a snappy dresser you are. So I knew there was bad news coming. I was prepared that something was going to be told to me that, like Hezekiah, would be unwelcome news. So I went in on February 27th, and I had known this doctor that I saw for many, many years. We were about the same age, and we were, I wouldn't say friends, we didn't visit each other, but we were friendly. We knew each other. And he walked in, and I could tell that he didn't want to be there. He didn't like what he was about to have to do, but he knew he had to do it. And so he told me, look, I've known you too long, and this is too serious to handle on the telephone. So I wanted to see you in person. He said, I don't know how else to tell you other than just say it. You have leukemia. What? What? That can't be. I've been healthy. I was going, I was doing whatever I wanted to do. And he said, the reason you're feeling pain in your left side is your spleen is very enlarged. He said, your white count, 15 times normal. And he said, the reason the bones in your leg hurt is because the bone marrow is affected by leukemia. So the bone marrow is hurting. He said, we need to get you in to see an oncologist as quick as we can. I don't even know what to say. I don't know what to say. And I said, well, okay, we'll do that. And I said, all I can tell you is I'm going to live the best I can for whatever time I've got left. And I walked out of his office, and here's what I felt. That's what I thought. I thought that I had just been told, you're going to die and not live. And we all kind of think about, wonder what'll end my life. You wonder about that sometimes, and it had crossed my mind. I didn't dwell on it. I don't think you should. And so I thought, well, I guess now I know. I know what it's going to be. So I had a while to think about it. Do you know what I did the minute we walked out of that office? You know what was on my mind? I need to get some things done. I've got to set my house in order. I've got things that are pending that would be tough for my family if I left it like this. I can't do that. I'm sure that Hezekiah thought like that. Must have. He didn't have to think about it very long. I got to think about it about 2 weeks. And you know what I was doing in those 2 weeks? I was setting in order as fast as I could, because I thought time's about up. It's about to end for you. On March the 13th of that year, I had an appointment with an oncologist that I had never met. I walked in and talked to him, and he was a very nice man. He'd been practicing a long time, and he said, well, you definitely have leukemia. And he said, here's the good news. There's no cancer that you'd want to have, but if you had to pick one, you've got the kind that I would pick. He said, we have medication that we can't cure you. It's not going to cure you, but it'll control it. It'll keep it under control. And he said, you'll be able to go on and live your life if you keep taking this medication. And I saw God's hand in that. Not in a miraculous way, but God has let people know enough to know how to develop that medicine. The oncologist said, this is the single biggest breakthrough in cancer treatment in my lifetime. And he's 65 years old. He'd seen a lot. He said, this is the most dramatic thing that's ever happened. He said, it took what used to be a fatal illness and just made it a chronic illness that you can live with. And I walked out of that office thinking, you're probably going to live a little while longer. But you know what I did? I quit all this preparation I'd been doing. For 2 weeks, I'm scrambling around trying to get everything in order that I should have been doing all along, and I knew it. But I'd put it off. I didn't take care of business the way I should have. And now I'm right back in the same habit again. I got some time, no hurry here. Anybody been through an experience like that? I don't think I'm that unusual. I think that's how we are. And that's the reason I told that story, is this is how we are. This is the way we look at things. We put it off. What would you do today if you got the kind of news that Hezekiah got and what I got that I thought was the same thing? What would you do? If somebody told you, you just have a few months left, just a few months. Hezekiah was a little different because he had 15 years, and that probably impacted it because he thought that's a long time. If it was imminent, if you thought it was just about to happen, what would you do? Would it change the way you look at things? Would it change the way you live your life? Would it cause you to change your priorities? I got to tell you that what I heard definitely did that for me, and it still is. Even though I've been able to live with this, I don't look at things exactly like I used to. I don't. Because I've heard that, and I know that the time is growing short. And I know I need to keep my house in order. I know this. And so it has affected me, even though I kind of slacked off on some of the stuff. It has changed how I view things a lot. If you heard that news, would you use your remaining days to serve God the best you could and to try to do good? Or would you waste them like Hezekiah did? Hezekiah's 15 years really didn't help that much. In fact, I was reading what some people say about it and said, you know, the truth is, might have been better off if he hadn't lived those 15 years. Might have been better. Maybe it would have been better. Here's the truth about it. Every one of you has heard the same message that Hezekiah heard. Every one of us. I don't care, from the youngest of us to the oldest of us, we've heard that same message. Set your house in order, for you shall die and not live. I don't want to be morbid about this, but everybody here is going to die. I don't think that's a surprise to any of you. You know this, don't you? You're not going to live. Eventually, this life ends. It's over. You'll hear what I heard, what Hezekiah heard. You'll hear something that says, this is the end. Set your house in order, for you shall die and not live. That's the message that God has given us all. Listen to what he has told us, not in those words, but listen to this. As it appointed for men to die once. Every one of us has got an appointment with death. Everybody does it. And you'll keep that appointment. Every one of you will. We'll all keep it. We won't have a choice about that. James wrote, whereas you do not know what will happen tomorrow. I didn't know the day before I went in that I was going to hear what I heard. I didn't know that, but I heard it. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. For what is your life? It is even a vapor that appears for a little time, and then it vanishes away. That's exactly how life goes. And this is not something new. Job knew it way back in his time. Man who is born of woman is a few days and full of trouble. He comes forth like a flower and fades away. He flees like a shadow and does not continue. People knew it back then. They'd seen it. They could understand it. And this is familiar to all of you. The days of our lives are 70 years. And that's what I was when I heard that news. Coincidentally, 70 years. And I thought of this scripture when I heard that. The days of your life are 70 years. And if by reason of strength they are 80 years, yet their boast is only labor and sorrow. For it is soon cut off, and we fly away. That's life. That's the story of life right there. Every day that we live is like a bonus. It's like those 15 extra years that Hezekiah got. Because every day is not promised to you. You don't have a promise. I don't care how young you are. I read a statement that said, old people will die and young people may. There's truth in that. So every day is a bonus, but in spite of that, we don't sometimes take that seriously. We continue our lives as if we had from now on. If time and opportunities are unlimited, we can do whatever we want for the indefinite future. That's not true. It's not true. And we ought not to live our lives that way. If that's how we're living, then we're wasting our lives like that. Like Hezekiah sort of wasted those 15 years he got by some of the decisions that he made. There's some people listening to me today, maybe here in this building, perhaps at home, or who will hear this later on a recording, that need to make changes in their life, need to get their house in order. Perhaps there's a little bit of that in all of us. You know, it's not a one-time event, and Mike kind of touched on this morning as he spoke. This is an ongoing effort. We get our lives in order, and then we have to fight to keep them that way. So it's an ongoing effort on our part. Tomorrow is the beginning of a brand new year. Is there a better time than right now to start that process of getting our lives in order, setting things in order, because we don't know what the future holds? So I want to leave you with two questions. I want you to think about these things. This is your, as they say in the business world, this is your takeaway. Is there something that you need to do, that you know you need to do, but you've been putting it off? Is there something like that? Something that you realize should have already happened, but you've just neglected to get it done. Maybe somebody's out there listening here or elsewhere that has never even obeyed the Lord in baptism. Man, do you need to get that done? You need to get that done. Maybe some people listening, maybe they just haven't been as faithful as they needed to be. Maybe they need to step it up a notch or two here. Do what you can and do a better job of it. Be more dedicated. Maybe you just haven't been as diligent about using your abilities and your opportunities because you thought time was never ending. Don't look at it that way. I read this statement: procrastination is the thief of time and souls. And it's both. It's both of those. And I'm here to tell you, these things are true. It's hard to hear. I know you don't want to hear that. I don't like hearing it either. I don't even like saying it, but it's true. Question number 2. Is there something that you're doing that you know you need to stop? I think about that, and New Year's seems to be a time everybody thinks about, what am I going to stop? Not necessarily what am I going to do, but what am I going to quit doing? You know, there's all kinds of things like that. Maybe you've let distractions of the world control your life. Maybe that's what's happened. Maybe you're having disputes with people around you. Maybe it's people at work, or maybe it's your neighbors, or maybe it's someone in your own family that you've got a problem with, and you're harboring an ill feeling toward them, and a grudge has taken hold. All of these things happen. These are not unusual. This stuff happens to people in life. But don't you know you need to stop that? We all need to do better than that. How about trying to have one foot in and one foot out? We want to be in the world. We're not supposed to be of the world, but we sort of want to be a little bit of the world. It's a little bit. Just step in it. These are things we need to stop. And God has told us that. We need to stop. Because one of these days, just like that slide just fell backwards, did you notice that? I did that on purpose, because that is what our life is going to be like someday. The story of our life is going to be like that. It's going to fall and there'll be a blank screen just like that right there. What do you want your life to be like when it comes to that time? What do you want it to be? Well, there's the order that we have right there. Set your house in order, for you shall die and not live. And I want to leave that thought with you this morning. Let me tell you something. I want to apologize for this lesson just a little bit. I didn't want to give it. I tried putting this lesson together a long time ago, many months ago, and I put it aside. I said, it's too negative. I don't want to give a negative lesson like that. So I didn't. I put it off, and then I'd get it out again, think, maybe I ought to give that. No, I can't. It's too negative. And then I said, no, it isn't. It isn't negative. If you're setting your house in order, you have no reason to fear death. You have no reason to. Don't worry about death, and don't turn your back to people and weep if you hear it's coming. Death just takes us to the next realm and back to what God intended us to be from the beginning. So this is not a negative lesson. This is a positive lesson of let's keep our house in order so we can look forward to that day and do it with confidence. So if you took it in a negative way, I'm sorry. I do apologize for that. I did not mean it to be negative, but I know that it probably is just a little bit. You know, we're ready to try to help you today. If you need to set your house in order in some fashion, we'd like to be a part of that. We want to help. Let's help each other keep our house in order. Let's do that. If you need that, if you need baptism, if you need prayers of the church, if you just need someone to talk to, let us know so we can help you. We can't help what we don't know. We've got an invitation song that's been selected. If you need the help from this congregation, come forward and sit on one of these front chairs as we sing, and we'll be glad to assist you. Just stand while we sing.